This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. Once again, it's my pleasure to have with us Dr. Buck Melton. Buck, it's good to have you with us tonight.
Always glad to be here.
We generally start off talking about your frustrated political ambitions, but
I'm not frustrated. They may be frustrated, but I am not. So.
Well, okay. I mean, we just have to accept these things now. Maybe there's going to be an opening in Washington in the White House with the charges of collusion that are out there against President Trump and the Russia connection. So that might be a springboard for conversation about collusion and what exactly is that, and is it illegal to collude with somebody? Is that a crime?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. Accessory before the fact, accessory after the fact, conspiracy. Conspiracy, of course, is a huge catchphrase. So
you'd have to, I mean, in other words, to get some charges against someone, you'd have to have another turn of phrase. So it would have to go from collusion to conspiracy.
Never having been a criminal lawyer, I'm not going to stick my neck out on that one, and there are just so many complicated ideas there. I know that conspiracy is the one that I've had most of the dealings with, and many people. Clarence Darrow, for instance, hated the very idea of conspiracy. He claimed it was essentially a thought crime. So, but collusion, more activity involved.
Well,
more
let's
action,
in general, I mean, I guess we can go with Clarence Darrow's thoughts. Don't people sort of talk to each other for a common end, and they're trying to do something for a particular, to get something accomplished?
To forward some sort of enterprise,
right, and you may or may not have had an interchange. Yes. So if you, the question is, if you said, if I said we were discussing your political ambitions, and you said, gee, I'd like to take over the position in the White House, and then I thought, well, that would be a good thing. And then I took some steps to help you do that by mentioning it on the TV show. It's funny.
Gee, thanks.
But that's funny, isn't it? But so I mean, is that collusion, or you said to me, let's mention it on the TV show. When do we get into some illegalities? And it's very difficult to get into illegalities with an American citizen, is it not?
Yes.
So isn't that the common thing that happens in politics? So the deal is everybody is soliciting support. You could say, well, this is the person I'd like to collude with to be elected to whatever position. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty okay, isn't it?
Let's try something even more interesting than that. We're standing on the street corner. There's a bank across the street, and you say, gee, if I knew for a fact that I was not going to get caught by a police car coming down the street, I might just go rob that bank. And you look at me meaningfully. And I say nothing, I do nothing.
Yes.
You go in and rob the bank. Have I colluded? I haven't called 911.
Well, I guess what we're getting into is the way this discussion is going in the press and in the media is that there's some kind of bright line. That if you cross this bright line, there's some kind of legal penalties against you from doing that. And I mean, there could be some way that you've done something illegal as an American citizen. There must be some laws that if you bribe someone or you did something that was egregious, there'd be a different turn of phrase. But the deal is that this is the collusion allegedly took place with a foreign power.
Yes.
So that's now and just to continue with that, isn't that a common thing in general in the American political process? So don't all of the nations of the earth try and get their interests protected in the American political process? And they would say, well, I don't know if you're a Mexican. You're a Mexican government and there are Mexican dual citizens there, and you want the NAFTA to continue, something would be going on. the agents of the Mexican government, in some ways, or their dual citizens, would be talking to politicians to get that accomplished. So isn't that just normal?
Yes.
I mean, and hasn't it always happened like that? I mean, the Canadians, who knows what those pesky Canadians are up to? I mean, I don't know what they're doing, but I mean, there's just
Bill Butler is going to get you.
For so yes. Canadians. But so all kinds of impacts are taking place, but something else happened here too, yes. And that was allegedly. The intelligence apparatus of the Soviet or of Russia hacked into the DNC's
servers, yes,
and discovered all kinds of knavery, which seems to be forgotten in the whole story. So they said, okay, look at all the terrible things you're up to here. I mean, you're trying to stop, Bernie Sanders. You're doing this. You got all that. We found ways to get this information. They then passed it to WikiLeaks, which he's a guy that's in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Still holed up.
And he's got rape charges against him, some kind of bizarre story in Sweden, very, very bizarre story. He's stuck there. In any event, they somehow fed him the information, and then he put it out, and then that had an impact on the political process.
Yes.
And so what about that to start with? Did the intelligence officers, apparently they committed a U.S. crime when they did that. It was a crime, and isn't that pretty common? In other words, aren't all the governments, including our government, hacking everybody? Our intelligence agencies are doing all kinds of things. There's a secret world out there.
The Stuxnet virus, by which we allegedly messed up the Iranian centrifuges.
Right.
Well, there's a whole spectrum of involvement, and some are seen as more legitimate, some are less legitimate, and then somewhere in the middle we hit that gray area. And of course, we've got the brave new world now of modern technology that allows us to interfere in ways that would have been unimaginable prior to 50, even 40 or 30 years ago. So, for instance, can I have an official lobbying agent? If I'm the Israeli government, for instance, can I have a lobbying agency on K Street just to foment good relations with Congress and hey, here we are, let's be friends. On the other hand, I can have a Russian spy honey trap that's just come up.
Yes. Is that appeared recently? There's a honey trap?
I think a few days ago there was a Russian national, 29 years old, in D.C. She had been in bed, I believe, allegedly, sometimes quite literally, with people involved in the NRA, and she'd been funneling intel back.
Okay, right. Well,
it's still coming out, and all this is alleged.
I'm happy to hear that humans still are behaving like humans.
So there's above board, there's clearly and then there's somewhere in the middle. But I would imagine, and I don't know all the statutes involved, but hacking into private servers is a bad thing.
Well, don't we need some kind of clarification? I mean, exactly what's going on here. So, the idea is that so I'm sort of making the case, this is business as usual everywhere.
Yes.
The laws are very vague and not just in a, I guess, not bright line as to what's going on. Everybody's doing whatever they're doing. Presumably, the Russian government just did this without the connivance of Trump, or only indirect. So what? I mean, he's not telling them to do it. Although I think it is fair to say, from my knowledge of the situation, that the Russian government was supporting Trump. I was in Moscow for a bit. And I'm not any secret agent or anything, but I was there, and the impression I had was the government was against Hillary and for Trump, and they're doing this. And
Putin has said as much in so many words during the meeting.
Right. And so they said, okay, maybe we'll do this. At the same time, maybe we can screw up the American political system and weaken NATO and get the Ukraine back. So that's our motivation about that. And the vagaries of everything going on is so confusing to the American people. So just getting some kind of understanding would be important. And maybe there's a naivete about the American people, about how they're being manipulated in general by everybody, by the media, by whatever, So if you're here in Macon, Georgia, and you're hearing this, you're hearing that, and what kind of predigested information are you receiving from the media? Isn't everyone trying to manipulate you?
Yes.
And that's what's going on to influence your vote. And the fact that it's going on shouldn't shock anyone. It's like in Casablanca, arrest the whatever usual suspects.
Usual suspects.
The usual suspects are that there's tremendous effort to manipulate the American political process, to manipulate the, quote, democratic system, to get a particular policy put in place. And the voters imagine that they're doing this in an independent way.
Yes.
And then all kinds of things are happening. And particularly with the media, the press, what story are they going to talk about? So when Putin was quizzed by Mr. Wallace, he asked, well, what about, let's see, killing all your opponents? I thought that was pretty interesting. Well, you probably shot 59 people and you cut their throats if they hassle you. Well, politicians in America get killed too. So there was not any, oh, I didn't do it. It's just like, hey, that's just normal way.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the Russian heads of state. And I remember when Gorbachev was interviewed by Brokaw, and they're just used to being able to shut down the press over there.
Right.
And I mean, it's just part of the culture. Yeah, I think we're sort of going through a Vietnam moment in our history at this point. That during the Cold War, by some estimates, we interfered in foreign elections about 80 times.
Yes.
I don't know. A lot of that is still top secret. We'll never know. But certainly, I think Kennedy gave the nod to the removal of Ngo Dinh Diem.
Yes.
That was involvement, but that was different. The thing about Vietnam is war has always been horrible. It's always been a terrible thing. And we have been lucky and tremendously fortunate in this country to have our civilian population, by and large, spared being personal witnesses to the horrors of war.
Yes.
Now, of course, when you have a conscript army, the way we had to have in World War II, when you have Sherman march through Georgia, the way we did in 1864, the civilians do have some experience of it, but not the way that, for instance, the Soviets had half their country scorched in the 40s.
Sure, 20, 30 million people killed, terrible.
And then in Vietnam, suddenly, through the miracle of television and eventually satellites and live coverage, the American civilian bosses of the government could see how horrible war actually was. And it was we, the United States, inflicting this on the Vietnamese people, killed 1.5 million people in Southeast Asia. And it was like, how could we be doing this? This is not right. And you got that jaundiced, cynical view of American government coming out of that period, and we've never done without it since. Now, with the internet, we are seeing the same thing. We are seeing the same kind of involvement that had not really been obvious to Americans up until today, when you can find out just about anything. And you can also hear every crazy crackpot conspiracy theory from left and right. So we're having this huge debate now. What is acceptable? What isn't acceptable? Even if we can figure out what is acceptable, how do we know if something has actually happened that has crossed that line? Maybe what we're reading is a lie. Maybe it's just spin. I don't know.
Well, there's a great deal of paranoia out there. There's, let's see, the paranoid style in American politics.
Yes, indeed.
Right?
Hofstadter.
At Columbia University, right?
It really was a black eye for his career when he wrote that.
Really?
Yes, it was.
Oh, I thought it was pretty. I won't get into Hofstadter, but I mean, I thought he did great, and his career took a tumble after that. We won't go there. Audience, we won't go too much into that.
It's dry history.
Okay, we'll let it go. We'll let it go. In any event, one of the things going on with all the cultural clashes that are happening is and the story is the elections have been stolen, or you were tricked, or that somebody's spying on you, or it's not the real story, or you can't trust anyone, and that another group is going to get you, is having a corrosive impact on the national psyche.
And legitimacy. I mean, it's the same thing as hanging Chads in 2000. The illegitimate government. that got in by hook or crook.
And I sometimes
not my president.
I sometimes quote the New York Times, but there's an article, it's a thought piece in their opinion piece. Is America collapsing? And the story is it's a very diverse country. It's done these great things. It's the world's life raft. It's just an incredible beacon for humanity. And the social tensions are extraordinary, and many people would say that it reminds them of Spain, 1935 in Spain,
yes.
the cultural tensions that were there. So just to tell people what was going on, the 1930s, up in the northern part of Spain, industrialism was taking place. All kinds of contemporary ideas were happening. In the south, Andalusia, there was a conservative Catholic viewpoint. And so these two parts of Spain, Catalonia and Andalusia, were so different. The only way they could resolve their problems was a terrible civil war. It's a horrible story. But then the cultural tensions are certainly, we're not to that point in the U.S., but they're rising a lot. And it doesn't seem like politicians or the media are trying to cool things out much, are they?
Not in the least. They're throwing gasoline on the fire.
Now, do you think that President Trump has exacerbated these issues, or is it a necessary purgation, whatever he's up to? What do you think?
I don't think it's a purgation. I think, and I have terribly mixed emotions about Trump, but I think he has played the last 24 to 40 hours very, very badly. Going in private meeting with Putin. Putin is former KGB. He's probably outstanding as an interrogator. Trump, I think one of his qualities is that he knows better than everyone else. And so, he is the perfect mark for a former KGB interrogator to have his way with. And then when he comes out and he starts seeming to be like he's Putin's mouthpiece when there are already these suspicions hanging over him. Even Trump apparently has now realized that he has made a major tactical blunder for his presidency.
Well, just to discuss that, we can remember George W. Bush talking to Putin and looking at his eyes, and, well, I can see a great soul there, or whatever. They just stared at each other. I don't doubt that he's, has great, in some ways, merit of some type to be in that position. But if we really look at the power dynamics of what's up here, the Soviet, I've made the comment before about Russia's geopolitical situation. It's so fragile. I don't really think they're too much, they've got nuclear weapons. But the idea of trying to cast them as the great American rival, I just don't think that comports with the geopolitical situation. If you look at Russia, it has 140 million people there. Their birth rate is terrible. We've discussed abortions. They have a lot of them. They have alcoholism, terrible health. It's a diverse country spread everywhere. And if you just go around the globe, you see Alaska, they're right against there. You then go to Japan, where there's a struggle over the Kuril Islands. The Japanese have almost the same population of all of Russia there, and there's tension there. Then you go to North Korea, so that Russia has a border with North Korea, and so there's this crazy guy there, very close to their big seaport. Is a tension situation.
And then you go
to China,
yes.
And so China has 1.4 billion people, 10 times the population.
And not nearly enough land.
10 times the size. And Russia took a lot of Chinese land in 1860. So the Amur River, the whole part of Russia was they annexed Chinese provinces, rather like the U.S. Annexed Mexican provinces. Yes. Then just continue going. You go into Central Asia, where there's an enormous Islamic viewpoint there. So there's a lot of tension in Central Asia, a lot of terrorism, you could say. Then you swing, you go into Iran, which is maybe have nuclear weapons. You get into then you go to Turkey, which is a traditional Russian enemy, and then you sail into the Ukraine, which is fighting a war with Russia and over a bit of land, and then you hit NATO. So this huge consortium,
which is occupying territory that has been Russian.
So you have this huge group of players. Basically, the whole world is surrounding this diminished country with great traditions. Only 140 million people, totally dependent on petroleum and petroleum exports. And so the economy of the place is a very shaky kind of situation. It's true enough they have nuclear weapons, but to suppose that that's I guess they have a great glorious tradition and et cetera, and they're wonderful people there, but their geopolitical clout is just not equal to the West or the U.S. And so the idea that seemingly what Putin is trying to do is disturb that alliance that's against him and get the Ukraine back. I mean, that's his number one objective. So when he's doing these things with Trump, whatever, and you could say that President Trump's deal is that he wants his legitimacy restored for all the, he's the kind of narcissistic personality that requires whatever it requires. Not to say that he doesn't have his good points, but he certainly could be manipulated and was manipulated, and so what? I mean, as long as nothing of contrary import occurred, all right, that's just part of our little political theater we observe every night.
Yes, the question is, will this have any impact on his policies? Statements, Trump says things, this is what he does, and he disses our own intelligence community. But it looked.
Or he claimed. I think he claimed he misspoke, which is unusual, right?
Yes, he said, "I don't see why it would." He said, "I don't see why it would be Russia," and he said that I meant to say, "I don't see why it wouldn't be." I mean, the context. I mean, this is just.
Well, it is amusing. I mean, you could say he's an amusing personality. He's certainly unusual.
Yes.
And. The way the country works is maybe I brought up the idea of purgation. So maybe as long as nothing bad happens, it's not altogether bad to say the emperor has no clothes, which is kind of what he's doing. So we have the mythology that's out there. Myths are very necessary. So President Trump is saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be sending all the money there. Maybe the people should pay more. Maybe we're getting bad deals here. Maybe NAFTA has problems. And it's true enough, no one really, the elites really have not paid attention to industrial workers anywhere. I mean, they just haven't. And the world order, the internationalists, you could say maybe that's good to do that. Maybe it is.
Yes.
But certainly there's a large group of people in the country that are being injured, and so Trump's, I guess, saying I'm your hero to fix this.
Well, it's a revival of nationalism that the Democratic Party has clearly been internationalist for at least a century, and there is a large internationalist wing within the Republican Party as well, and Trump has at least appealed during his campaign to nationalist strains in the American electorate. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think the problem is a lot of people concatenate nationalism with jingoism.
Yes.
But the idea is we can't keep shoveling this money. That NATO does seem more and more to me outmoded any day. But I don't know. I don't think what Trump did is treasonous. A lot of people just thrown the word treason around.
What is treason? I'll ask that question. What is it?
It's very clear. Yeah, that is the only crime that is actually defined in the Constitution.
Oh, and how is it defined?
It was defined that way because the people who wrote the Constitution had been traitors to His Majesty George III, and therefore they were very touchy on that issue.
Right.
Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. So the question is, what is levying war, and who are our enemies? Is Russia our enemy in a strict technical sense?
Well, so that seems to be. I mean, just to go through this, that's. I mean, of course, let's see. It's interesting. The head of the intelligence agency, former maybe head of the CIA, accused Trump of treason.
Yes.
Which is, think about that. I mean, this is not a good word to throw around, and it's the tenure of the Times. It's really quite remarkable. that former head of the CIA has accused an American president of treason, presumably by giving aid and comfort to America's enemies. And the question would be, that's a big deal to call someone an enemy. It's particularly difficult when the president is calling everyone something more or less enemies or rivals or whatever turn of phrase he has. So that's a real complicated story we're getting into, and I'm not altogether happy with it. I'm not happy with it. You could say that you get into nation-state issues. This country has a wonderful, I guess, identity that's difficult to maintain. Now, the word that comes out to me is nativist. So when people start talking about the, national identity or whatever, people could be the number of people that are here, the general diversity of the country, which has been espoused as a good and glorious thing, has some drawbacks to it. It's very hard to have a national identity, and the country is its roots and construction are very artificial compared to let's say China. The people that have been there, they have the same ethnic identity. They have at least 4,000 years of common history. Many countries have common histories, common ethnicities, common religion, common this, common that. And the U.S. is this strange experiment, and it would be very easy to unhinge that national identity with careless politicians.
Well, and it's interesting. Yes, it's interesting that you should mention that, because when I hear the words treason being tossed around, that word especially, it's a canary in a coal mine. That usually the concept of treason or of illegitimacy, and we've been hearing a lot, as I said, not my president,
right.
Bush stole the 2000 election, Obama's going to connive a way to have a third term. This is a very unhealthy way of thinking, and these canaries in the coal mine are the signs of a government or of a civilization that feels like it doesn't have a strong grip on things. That if you look at our national history for the first 10 or 20 years, the 1790s, the very early 1800s, first half decade or so, the idea of a loyal opposition had not emerged. That the Federalist political party really believed that the Jeffersonian Republican Party, if it got elected and elected a president, was going to set up guillotines and start chopping off Federalists' heads. And the Republicans actually believed that Alexander Hamilton wanted to create an American monarchy and set himself up as a king. And so you saw charges of treason and you saw impeachments being thrown around all over the place. And it wasn't until a few years after the Federalists fell to the Republicans and nothing horrible happened that everything started calming down. And
you saw good feeling.
Yeah, and you saw these dangerous ideas start to evaporate, but now they're coming back again, and it's scary.
It is quite scary, and so I think what needs to happen here is there needs to be more civility in our national dialogue, and that's an important thing for political figures to try and obtain.
And they are not doing it; they're refusing.
That's right, and so all the commonality we have it needs to be there, and mutual respect. And on both sides, and it's the level of animosity, and I might even use the word hatred, is out there. It's very, very destabilizing.
Yes.
And it's important for people of goodwill to step forward and do something about that.
Well, my last comment on that is that we could use a little bit of Benjamin Franklin's wisdom on this point, and when he said after they'd approved the Declaration of Independence, we must now all hang together or we will surely hang separately.
Okay, and on that note, thank you, Bucky. Thanks for your good interchange once again. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.